So they've had quite good reviews, both in the US and France. Are you aware of Choice magazine? You know what Choice magazine is?
Yes, it's for the library book selection, and
Right.
you got a review in Choice.
I not only got a review, but they gave it highly recommended, which is their best.
That's the best rating you can get.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and they usually put good scholars on those reviews.
Yeah, so I was rather pleased with that. I think Choice is, I got some excellent reviews, but the Choice review is the one that I think made the publisher decide to put out a paperback edition. So it's coming out next week.
Yeah.
It's not a cheerful book.
No, genocide is not a cheerful subject. And
So what's this all about?
yeah, well, Guljana called you last moment and
Right.
asked. I'm here 3 days before the trustees meeting tomorrow, and Dr. Ward asked me to do some interviews. We're trying to get some material for the UB website and
Okay.
probably splice together. I've been interviewing about 20 people about the International College,
Okay.
about UN
Incidentally,
activities.
Are you aware that Rebecca got a State Department fellowship for the?
Yes, I interviewed her.
She is she's not only a lady, she's an extremely intelligent woman. I'm very fond of her.
She's had some of your classes.
Yeah, she seems to like my classes, and I'm very, very fond of her.
She's a world religions major, I believe.
Right, yeah. And she certainly speaks well for her background and her ancestry.
Yeah, she's going to Tunisia, I believe, this summer on an internship.
Right, the State Department internship.
State Department.
Okay, now what's this, what kind of questions you can ask?
Well, I think the first thing I'll ask you is what attracted you to the University of Bridgeport?
Are you going now?
What? Pardon?
Is this thing going?
Yeah,
now?
it's going, but I will just
Okay.
take what's good and splice things.
I arrived at the University of Bridgeport in a somewhat different way than most people who are on the faculty. I was invited to become one of the original PWPA nominated trustees to the university when PWPA first came to the university. And as a result of that, I got to know the university. I also got to know its problems. And I also had a high opinion of the PWPA team, which was helping, and I felt that I could work with them. So that's where it started. I then became the chairman of the Board of Trustees and had a deeper understanding of the university's problems. And then one day in October of 1994, Dr. Neil Salonen, the current president, took me and my wife, Dr. Betty Rubenstein, out to dinner on a very cold, rainy night. We were up from Florida for a Board of Trustees meeting, and he asked me if I would like to become president of the university. And without giving it a thought, I said yes, I would, and I've never had any regrets from that time to the present day. Although I did come into the university when it was experiencing a period of great financial and academic problems.
the university has a long history of growth and relationship to the United Nations, and certainly you must have been aware of some of its past glory when you took the office.
I was aware of the role that the university had played, how important it was for the cultural life of the region of New England, not just Bridgeport. And I knew that the problems of the university, if the university were in the proper hands, would be temporary, and that judgment proved to be accurate. I would add one other element about the International College. When I became president of the university, I realized that there were no courses in religious studies. And I was determined that we would have a program in religious studies. Now, normally, such programs are put into the College of Arts and Sciences. But I suggested, and it was approved by the trustees, that our program in religious studies be put into the International College. And the reason I did that was because I was convinced that it would be impossible to understand international business, international diplomacy, or international conflict without understanding the religious element in the conflicts, the diplomacy, and the politics. And I am convinced that that was the right decision. I'm also convinced that the International College is in very good hands with the leadership of Dr. Thomas Ward, and that he understands these things as well. It's one of the reasons why I continue to offer one course a term in the International College. And if I might add, I regularly make a donation to the university. I do this every year, but I always earmark that donation to the International College as an expression of my approval and my appreciation of what we are doing.
There is a good reputation around the world about University of Bridgeport's international character, and a lot of students from a lot of different countries are here really learning about other religions, learning about other cultures, and it seems to be a real central place where that kind of dialogue can take place.
I think it's probably the best place in the country for that. For one thing, we have the highest percentage of our students are international students. Secondly, they do get to know each other, and they do become acquainted with other institutions and other traditions. And then, of course, the faculty is experienced in the international context in which we work. And quite frankly, when I became president, people asked me, well, is the Professors World Peace Academy going to have an influence on the university? Of course, people then thought that such an influence would be a narrow, doctrinally orthodox kind of influence. And my answer was, of course they're going to have an influence, but it's going to be an influence for good, because Professors World Peace Academy is an international organization with members throughout the world. And that very focus on international concerns was bound to have some spillover, as it has for the university. And so that's essentially what happened.
How have you, what's been your experience with the students you've had in your class?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, when I first became president, my biggest fear was that I would be presiding over a college of losers. And the reason why I thought that was because we were in deep trouble, and to be perfectly honest with you, the press was just uncivil and hostile. And I figured, well, who are the people who are going to go to the university? And I was afraid that we would be getting inferior students. But immediately when I got to know the students, I realized that we had some superb students. And right from the start, I could see that many of our students were going to go on from our school to significant positions in the world of business and diplomacy and international aid. And the result was that my fears were completely unjustified, and I couldn't have been more delighted. And as I got to know students, which I did, and I have worked with students now for 15 years, 16 years, and I've recommended many of them for graduate appointments to the elite schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and we've had a surprisingly good rate of acceptance into these schools. One girl I'm thinking of right now, fine young woman, her sister had gotten into Harvard, a graduate school, and then she also wanted to do an Ivy League graduate school. So I said, well, what schools do you want to apply to? And her answer was Harvard and Yale. And I said, don't you want the safety in case you don't get into either one of them? Because the chances are always that no matter how bright you are, given the competition for places in these schools, that she might not make it. And she says, no, just Harvard and Yale. And I was amazed because she got into both Harvard and Yale, got a fellowship at Yale, and decided to go to Yale. I guess her sister had gone to Harvard, and she decided she'd go to Yale. And she was typical of some of the brightest students that I've had. I believe that our best students are as good as students anywhere in the world. And they have a commitment to what they're doing and a seriousness which you do not always find among university students who are facing a very difficult and complex world.
You left Florida State University you had a very good position there, and now you've been in Bridgeport for 15 years. As you look back, are you glad that you made the move, or do you have regrets?
Let me put it to you this way. I would say the most difficult and complex job I ever had was my job as president of the University of Bridgeport. I would also say that it was the position that I enjoyed most, and I never had a moment's regret for becoming president of the University of Bridgeport. Pittsburgh was an earlier school that I went to. I've never had a moment's regret for any of the schools with which I've been affiliated with, but that was certainly the case with the University of Bridgeport. And it was the right move for me at the right time. I'm glad I made it. I'm also very happy with the man who succeeded me and has been able to carry on my work, and actually more than carry on my work, because quite frankly I think he's a better administrator than I was, Neil Salonen. So I think the university is in very good hands.
One of PWPA's interests is work with the United Nations. UB is just 50 miles from the UN, and when we originally made our proposal, we brought Rodrigo Carrazzo Odio, who had developed the University for Peace, and he made a pitch for the PWPA. How do you think the International College do you think it is serving the goals of values and knowledge, international cooperation, and should we work more with the UN? Have you done things with the UN? You can think about that ball of thoughts.
You're not going to want this on the program.
Well, okay, well, I'm going to cut and edit.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, I consider the UN a thoroughly corrupt organization. And just this morning, I was urging Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, to do everything she could to cut its budget. So, do I think that the students can get a lot from their UN contacts? Yes, I do. But if you ask me my opinion of the UN, it's very negative.
I don't think there's anybody, even within the UN, that doesn't think it should reform. People have a lot of different ideas about it, but we definitely are in a globalized world, and we're coming in contact with fundamentalist Muslims and other people that we had never had to deal with before, and I would hope that UB students UB is preparing its students
I
for
certainly would
this.
too. I think I would agree on that, and I have never discouraged our students from being as active with UN activities as they possibly can. They don't have to agree with the organization. They don't have to share my negative opinions, although quite frankly I'm not very forthcoming about giving my negative opinions to the students. But I think that, yeah, their exposure to the United Nations is very good. I just see, well, to be perfectly honest with you, I was an admirer of President Bush, and I'm definitely not an admirer of President Obama. And I have to tell you that I believe that in a world where the United States abandons its sovereignty, it makes for greater international confusion, not less international confusion. You can take that out.
No, I'm probably just going to have little snippets. Don't feel self-conscious about this.
Well,
and
I
won't do.
I know what Reverend Moon
Yeah.
thinks about the UN. I know it. I certainly don't sabotage what any of them are doing, but I personally am a very strong believer in the sovereignty of strong nations.
When Reverend Moon started the Professors World Peace Academy, he talked about values and knowledge, and
Yes.
that faculty and professors should have values and knowledge. Now, we've lived since the 1960s, a society in which pluralism was extolled. Everybody should do their own thing, and it seems like it's very hard for our politicians today to affirm any values when they're trying to make decisions. How do you look at this situation?
I agree with Reverend Moon. One of the reasons I was attracted to him to begin with, and one of the reasons why I never regretted my association with him. I had achieved a certain reputation as a theologian, and people often misread both my ethical and my political views, but I definitely believe that we are much too relativistic in both our political and our ethical views. And I think that one of the good things about Reverend Moon, and there are many, was that he understood this, and he understood that without some fixed point that would guide a person, they would simply be like a cork awash on an ocean, drifting hither and yon. So yes, I agree with Reverend.
And it's been very hard for universities that are secular and supposed to be affirming of everyone to understand how to bring values to knowledge. And how do you think University of Bridgeport is approaching that question?
Well, this was an issue that came up immediately when the PWPA offered to make a significant contribution to the University of Bridgeport so that the University of Bridgeport could continue and grow. And the accusation was that we were going to insist upon our own opinions, and we were going to try to convert people to the Unification Church. And none of this turned out to be the case. And had it been that way, I wouldn't have accepted the position. But I think we have to understand secularism in the right way. There's a right and a wrong way to understand secularism. What secularism means is that there is a withdrawal of political control from the religious sphere. It doesn't mean that there is no religious sphere. Quite the contrary. With the withdrawal of political control, you have the possibility of the growth of religious values in freedom. And by freedom, I don't mean that every opinion is as good as every other opinion. I believe that the great religions offer us guidelines which can show us what's right and what's wrong. And I believe that that's the way to go. And I think we've managed that very well at the University of Bridgeport. We cannot tell our students, well, this particular religious way is the way to go. What we can do is we can say, this religion affirms these values, and here are the reasons, and you must decide whether these are the values with which you can be loyal. And the choice is always there, but the choice is always there in any event. The problem with what's happened in our secular universities is that any position is given the same dignity as every other position. That simply doesn't work. I mean, the thing about great religions is that they're based upon the history and the experience of mankind for thousands of years. Some of the so-called new ideas are very recent and basically untried, and to give them the same dignity as the ideas in the great religion, the values in the great religion, is I think, a bad mistake. And one of the problems that we have in the West is that we're trying to compete against something with nothing. Whatever one may say about Islam and its competition with the West, they have values. But then when you look at the West, it's almost as if anything goes.
Well, part of the problem with the rise of science and scientific experiment is many people discounted the value of historical lessons because they weren't scientific. So you have this clash between those who believe in the scientific method and those who apply historical
Well,
studies.
I'm reading a book called The Information. It's a very interesting book. It's about the rise of non-Euclidean logic all the way up to the digital revolution right now. And one of the things that strikes me is that so much of science is based upon abstractions. But abstractions are not the same thing as the complexity of a human being and the complexity of the relationships between human beings. And where the great religions have the advantage is that they are not based upon abstractions. They do not abstract out of the human being all values until you are left basically with numerical sequences. And that's the fundamental difference. And one of the reasons why I was always religiously committed was because I understood this early on.
Some of our mutual friends talk about the axial age and a new axial age where you had kind of a coming together of tribes at the time of Jesus or a few hundred years before that, and the emergence of great civilizations based on tribes getting together, and today you have the collision of those great cultures. Do you see another kind of axial age where we'll develop a more universal recognition of values across the entire planet?
No. No. And the reason for this is because the absolute distinction between believer and non-believer is so rigidly held in some traditions that the kind of coming together that you talk about, I don't think is going to happen. Let me bring Reverend Moon into this discussion. One of the things that struck me when I would go to hear Reverend Moon talk was that every so often he would turn to, of all people, me, and say, "Is that so, Mr. Rubenstein? Is that what you believe in, Mr. Rubenstein?" Now, Reverend Moon knew that I wasn't agreeing with him at that point. But instead of making fun of me or belittling me, he said, "Yeah, what's your opinion?" And I would give it. And I suspect that the fact that I held my opinions with a certain degree of conviction made a difference to him. Occasionally he would say, "You have guts, Mr. Rubenstein, you have